not acceptable. Whether or not the Senate convicts, the House has an independent duty to do the right thing. That's why we have passed over 275 bipartisan bills that are stuck in the Senate. Whether impeaching or legislating, we will continue to be faithful to the Constitution regardless of what the Senate may or may not do. Moreover, impeachment is a form of deterrence. Our children are watching. No president ever wants to be impeached. And whether Donald Trump leaves in 1 month, 1 year, or 5 years, this impeachment is permanent. It will follow him around for the rest of his life, and history books will record it. And the people will know why we impeached. It's all very simple. No one's above the law, not our commander-in-chief, not our president. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, it's my pleasure to yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank my colleague. In 2016, 63 million Americans went to the polls and elected Donald Trump President of the United States. House Democrats have been trying to overturn the election ever since. In fact, they've tried 5 additional times to the one that's before us to impeach the president, including the vote in May of 2017, just 5 months into his term. In January of this year, House Democrats took control of this chamber, and they're faced with a choice. They could use the tools of the majority to pursue legitimate priorities of the American people, policies that can impact their lives, or they could use the tools to undo the 2016 election. They made their choice. Since then, House Democrats have issued more subpoenas than bills have been signed into law. That tells us all we need to know about this Congress and that party. Rather than launch a legitimate investigation, Democrats turned to focus groups to workshop their language, to see if they could sell this to the American people, and the American people have rejected it. Instead of negotiating with the executive branch, for instance, and allowing the courts to resolve any legitimate disputes, House Democrats rushed an impeachment vote. So here we are, 12 weeks later, voting whether to impeach the president based off the thinnest record in modern history. It's no surprise that the Senate is already asking for additional witnesses and more documents and real evidence. The body of evidence is weak and woefully insufficient for impeachment. And with that, I yield back on this sad day for this institution.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Raskin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. American elections belong to the American people, not the American president and not foreign powers. No president may cheat the people by working with foreign governments to steal from us a free and fair election. And no president who attempts it may cover up that cheating by systematically obstructing Congress in our work. Article 2 of the Constitution does not authorize a president to do whatever he wants. The reason we have a Constitution is to keep government officials from doing whatever they want. If we, the people, lose the certainty of free and fair elections to presidential corruption and foreign manipulation, then we lose our democracy itself, the most precious inheritance we have received from prior generations that pledged their sacred honor and gave everything they had to defend it. The struggle for democracy is the meaning of America. That is why we remain the last best hope of a world ravaged by authoritarianism, violence, and corruption. We must act now to protect our elections and safeguard constitutional democracy for the enormous and unprecedented challenges that still lie ahead of us. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, it is my pleasure to yield a minute and a half to the gentlewoman from West Virginia, Ms. Miller.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition of H.R. 755. Today is a disappointing day. It is the day my colleagues from across the aisle cast the vote that they have spent the last 3 years obsessing over. The vote to impeach our duly elected president. There are 2 charges claimed by House Democrats, and there is 0 cause for either. While President Trump has led, our country has thrived, and Washington liberals have failed. Despite the commitment of many of our colleagues to obstruct the Trump administration's agenda at every turn, our country continues to succeed. In this body, however, we have not been able to deliver on what Americans want and need. We still have not finished securing our border. The opioid epidemic still rages in our communities. Our infrastructure is still in dire need of an overhaul, and we still have not reached a bipartisan resolution on drug pricing. If Congress hadn't spent the last year stuck in a divisive, ugly, partisan impeachment debacle, think of what we could have done. The lives that could have been saved, the communities that could have been improved, the crisis on our southern border ended, and the positive work that we should do for our country. But we did.